Hello and welcome to the second episode of the Notaku Anime Chat. I'm one of your hosts, Setsuken, alongside
the interrupting one, Guardian Enzo. How are you?
I'm good. It's been a busy kind of week with the new season coming in, Anime Expo happening, and that's kind of what we want to talk about today.
Topic of the week, Anime Expo 2016.
Guardian Enzo, you were actually at Anime Expo, correct?
I was, but our intro there kind of reminded me of something, so Setsuken, knock knock.
Who's there?
The interrupting cow.
Oh, is that from Jin no Saji?
No! You ruined... Man, way to step on a punchline. Anyway, yes, I was at Anime Expo this year. It was my very first trip to Anime Expo, in fact.
Oh, nice. Was this your first anime convention as well?
Well, no, because I had been to... not surprisingly, over in Japan, there are anime conventions of some sort pretty much every weekend in Tokyo and also in the hinterlands as well.
So the OG anime events.
Yes. So one of the interesting things for me actually was to compare AX to the Japanese events. Also, I went to Fanime up in San Francisco a few years ago as well.
Oh, I don't think I've heard of that one.
It's smaller.
Yeah, I've been to a few smaller ones. Since I'm in the Midwest, I went to Anime Detour a few years in a row. And it was cool because it was one of those conventions where we did have some people from Japan come in as well, beyond just the usual localization companies and the voice actors, which is cool. But when you meet someone from Japan, as I'm sure you did at Anime Expo, that's something entirely different.
Yeah, especially for those of us that aren't huge fans of dubs. Meeting the 8 dub actors who are in 95% of all dubbed anime in English isn't really all that exciting. No offense, God love them, they do a great job, but it's the same group of people, and because if you don't watch the dubs, of course, you don't really know those people that well. So it is definitely more interesting to meet the Japanese seiyuu, the Japanese directors. I mean, Anime Expo being one of the 2 biggest anime conventions in the States gets a lot of big names, and this was I believe their 20th anniversary this year, so they had a huge number of big name guests. I think they really wanted to pull out all the stops.
Nice. So Anime Expo is kind of interesting because it really, to me, I've been more into games and games culture than anime culture, just in terms of conventions and stuff. And for video games, we have E3, which is kind of the big press-only event convention thing where all the big announcements come in and all that kind of stuff. And Anime Expo really does feel like that for anime. You actually have premieres, you have big events, you have announcements, some that are world first announcements that happen at Anime Expo.
Yep.
But before we kind of get into that as a whole, what are your views on just anime conventions as a whole? What do you kind of think about them?
Well, first of all, let me correct myself. It was actually the 25th anniversary of Anime Expo. So
oh, wow.
And also congratulations to them, too, because they did a big milestone this year. They broke the 100,000 mark for the first time in attendance, which is great. So that's 100,000 over 4 days. Just so our listeners and viewers have a little context, of course, Comiket, which most anime fans know about, they do 500,000 people in 3 days. So that is a monster event, but still...
Right, but that has a lot of selling and buying in it as well, correct?
Well, that's really... Yeah, that's more or less the point. But the thing about Comiket is, first of all, it's free, and second of all, it's majority fan-driven. I mean, what people go to Comiket to do for the most part is to buy and sell doujins.
Right.
And the industry has a hall there, and it's big, but the commercial side of Comiket is definitely less than half of the total square footage, and it's a very different experience. Anime Expo is just, as to your question of what I think of anime conventions in general, I think they fill a very different role in America than they do in Japan because it isn't totally mainstream over there. Manga certainly is, but anime isn't totally mainstream, but it's a lot more mainstream than it is in America. And so here I really think there's a sense of community that this is their opportunity to kind of get together and not have to be in the closet, if you pardon the expression, because I think in America a lot of anime fans, when they go to work, when they go to school, some of them don't necessarily want to publicize the fact that they're anime fans, for better or for worse. So this is really an opportunity to be surrounded by people who aren't going to judge them, who share the same passions that they do, and that's really important. And the other thing, of course, you get a lot of both here and over there is cosplay. That's a big thing.
And so that's an interesting topic to bring up, because in a lot of the conventions that I've been to, Anime Detour kind of being the biggest example, cosplay is almost like, I would say, 80% of what people are there to do. And it's interesting because it's something that I don't necessarily find all that interesting to do myself.
I agree.
I definitely respect people who do it.
Sure.
There is a lot of work, and some of the cosplays that people do are just amazing.
Absolutely. I respect them too. It is amazing. To be honest, have not that much interest in it myself, but I respect the fact that people do. They do put a lot of work into it. Some of the really imaginative ones, take your breath away. I will say, the cosplay at Comiket, we've still got some work to do here in the States to catch up to that same level of accuracy and sophistication that you see in a lot of the cosplay at Comiket.
Oh, really? Wow.
Oh, yeah. The cosplay in Japan, I mean, they've been doing it for a lot longer, obviously. Some of it is really, it's very breathtaking, and quite honestly, a lot more sexual, too, a lot of it.
Right. Yep, there's this, I don't know if some of the viewers or listeners have seen Genshiken, but that was kind of my look into how that whole cosplay side of things works there. And there's like a photo taking thing, and there's that whole culture, and to some extent that's here as well. But I agree with you, it's definitely not the same vibe or the same way as it is over there.
And the one thing that was a big learning for me that I really didn't know until I went over there was, and not that I ever got this wrong myself, but I was definitely warned about it at some point, don't take anyone's picture without their permission. And I thought, oh, okay, well, I guess that kind of makes sense. I didn't really think about it like a big deal, but to a lot of cosplayers, that's a really big deal. And they do actually have at Comiket, they have basically the cosplayers have their own section outside, and they have it set up with like a photo area, and the press will come in, the real press, and come in and take pictures, and so it really is a much more formal thing. And there are cosplay get-togethers and stuff at Anime Expo, but I think it's more just kind of people walking around in their costumes and seeing other people's costumes that they like and saying, "Hey, nice costume," that kind of thing.
Okay, that's interesting, because so there isn't like a cosplay contest or a...
No, they do have them.
Okay, they do. Okay,
but they're not as organized, and they're not as institutionalized as they are at Comiket. That's a definite.
Oh yeah, I'm sure, but at Anime Detour, maybe because cosplay is such a huge deal, it was really organized. There was like a stage show that was actually streamed to all the hotel rooms.
Wow.
So there was a stage presentation, and people would walk up on stage, and there was a competition. There was judges, so it was like almost American Idol-esque.
Okay.
If you can think of it that way. There wasn't any commentary, but I remember when I went to Anime Detour a few years ago, we actually just sat in the hotel room and watched that for like the hour that it ran.
Well, so I won't swear there's no streaming of any, because I know they had a couple of cosplay masquerades and stuff that they did at Anime Expo every year. They do them, and they might be streamed. I don't know. I won't swear they're not. I didn't see it advertised in any of the convention materials that I was looking at, but honestly, I wasn't scouring for it because that wasn't why I was there. So I won't swear that it didn't happen.
Yeah, I think, again, the kind of like getting back to how we, I guess, might be a bit of an older skewed generation than some of the newer kids, but cosplay and just dressing up in general is something that maybe I'm not as into and can't relate to as much. And we'll kind of leave it at that. Maybe at some point we can have a guest or someone on that's actually from that world and can kind of speak to the appeal of cosplay, because it's something that I definitely want to understand a lot more than I do.
Absolutely.
So, kind of going off of that, give me your general overall impressions of Anime Expo. What was the experience like?
Well, for me it was really enjoyable. This is not the first convention I've covered on a press badge, but it's kind of the elephant in the room. You don't want to completely ignore it. There are definitely some opportunities with Anime Expo to improve the way the communication, the line management. It's a lot of people, maybe more people than their infrastructure was originally set up to manage. I'm not going to compare it against Japan, because Japan is a country where you can get 10,000 people to line up in an organized serpentine without any stanchions or anyone telling them where to stand, and that's not realistically possible in the United States. I understand that.
Yep.
But, I have been to other major conventions that are a little bit more together, and I think that Anime Expo just needs to grow a little bit there, and I think there's some disconnect between the private companies that they have doing some of their door management, and then a lot of volunteers who are working hard but don't necessarily know all the policies. As someone who is there on a press badge, they have a very specific press policy that they have posted on their website, but a lot of the door security at all the panels and events didn't know what it was.
Oh, wow.
And
okay.
So stuff like that it was a little challenging. I missed a couple of panels that I would have liked to have seen because of that, which was disappointing. On the other hand, 100,000 people over basically technically a 4-day convention, but really a 3-day, 3 big days and a half day. It's very impressive. They actually sold out of door badges on Saturday and stopped taking people. The level of enthusiasm for anime in LA and the people who came from the surrounding area, it was pretty impressive. It was the content level. I mean, I was very impressed with the quality of the guests. The quality, I mean, some really good premieres, like the new Shinkai Makoto film. Not only did we have the world premiere of that 6 weeks ahead of the Japanese premiere, but also Shinkai Makoto himself, who was sneaking around inside the darkened hallway while we were watching, trying to see how the audience was reacting. So, I mean, stuff like that, that's pretty priceless. For me personally, it was a great experience. I got to do some interviews with some of the people I really look up to, more than respect, almost worship, really, as an anime fan, which was a big thrill. So it was, I mean, I won't say there weren't challenges. Fanime, which I mentioned earlier, up in the Bay Area, it's actually San Jose is where they hold it. It was more fun in the sense that everything was more manageable, more approachable. It's managed a lot more seamlessly, but then again, it's maybe 1/10 the size of AX.
I think the scale is a big deal. Just in terms of management, and drawing a parallel to, I guess, games and game conventions, I've actually volunteered at PAX, and I don't know if you know what PAX is exactly or if you've heard of it.
I've heard of it. I wouldn't be able to pick it out of a lineup, though.
Sure. So PAX is kind of like Penny Arcade. It's this webcomic, and they kind of created this games convention. There's some anime stuff in there as well, but it's mostly indie games and AAA games as well. But they are really organized, and they're one of the few conventions in the United States that really know how to do management, and they have like a whole system. They actually have people dedicated to entertaining people in lines.
Yeah, which would be great. I mean, I think that's a great idea.
Right, because I remember there was people that would like have giveaway things that they were obviously sponsored by the companies at the convention, but you could win things, you could play games. I remember there was a system where we grouped people into boxes, basically, and each box would kind of file in as they went, and we'd keep track of the capacity of a room, and if we hit that capacity, then we'd let people know that, it's full. And I don't know I don't know how the line management was there, but it seems like despite its scale, I think the operation just hasn't risen to the challenge.
Yeah, I mean, what I would be very interested if we have viewers who have been to, like, say, Otakon or Anime Boston, which I would think are probably the two other North American anime cons that get the biggest attendance. Not as big as Anime Expo, but pretty big. And I would be curious to hear from people who have attended one or both of those shows how they feel they're doing in terms of managing crowds and stuff, especially if those people have also been to AX and could compare it. Maybe those people could jump in on the comments. I think that would be really interesting. I have not been to either of those shows. The only other North American one I've been to, I've been to other conventions, but the only other anime convention was Fanime, like I said, which is, maybe 10,000 people, and it's a lot of fun, but it's almost more like, it almost feels like you're going to a big party at a college, if you know what I mean. It's it's very casual and very laid back, and you get a couple of Japanese guests, but nobody like Shinkai Makoto or Tsurumaki Kazuya or Suwabe Junichi, anybody of that level. You're not going to get those people at Fanime. So it's easy to do things more smoothly and to be more laid back when you're dealing with 1/10 the crowds. But like I said, I would be interested in hearing from folks who've been to Otakon or Anime Boston or one of the other really big shows. Like I said, the big thing for me, content is really amazing. The only downside really is they do, for understandable reasons, they fit almost all of the really good stuff onto Saturday and Sunday because they know those are going to be the days when they're going to have huge attendance, much more so than the Friday or Monday. And so you don't get, there were a lot of things I could not go to on the weekend because they were at the same time as other
overlapping.
So like I had at the very same time there was a Furikuri production IG panel that had Tsurumaki and Shintani-san, who played Haruko, who I really wanted to see. And then at the same time was the Boku no Hero Academia event with the director, which I also really wanted to see. But, you have to pick one or the other. And, even though I'm skeptical of Furikuri 2 and how it's going to be, knowing that Tsurumaki and Shintani were going to be there, and, I'm glad I went to that event because that was when they announced that the Pillows were going to provide the music for the new series, and they announced that Yoshiki Sadamoto was going to do the character designs again. So a couple of fairly significant announcements for Furikuri, which it's nice to be there when those things are happening, and tweet them out as you hear them. I missed the Boku no Hero. I would have liked to have been to that. I didn't get into the One Piece, One Punch Man event, which would have been a lot of fun, but they capped press for that, and I wasn't able to get in on that. But it is what it is. It was still a very, very fun and action-packed few days. Exhausting, utterly exhausting. But lots of fun.
Yeah, I think you bring up a really salient point, and I don't think I noticed it at Anime Detour because we had one or maybe two major Japanese people. Shinichi Watanabe was there, which was kind of big for me. I really like his work on The Wallflower. That's kind of the one series. But since he was the only major Japanese director, his panels were kind of in a time of themselves. But I think when you have something like Anime Expo, where there's a ton of personalities from Japan, the fact that there are panels scheduled at around the same time or events scheduled around the same time can kind of work against you in a way.
Yeah, it can, it would help if they, because Friday is a full day. It goes morning till evening, just like Saturday and Sunday, and they could put a couple of those big names or big panels on Friday to take some of the pressure off the weekend. But Friday attendance is not what it is on Saturday and Sunday, and I guess from their perspective, it makes no sense to put any of the really big stuff, which I totally understand. And I'd rather have too many. I'd rather have too many events I want to see than not enough. So from that perspective, that's a good problem to have. There's too many things to do at this convention, so that's a good problem. That's not a bad problem.
I agree, and I think if you go in a group, then you can divide and conquer as well. and see and hear about everything. So maybe next year, I definitely plan on going next year as well. So maybe that's kind of an option as well, and that way you don't miss out on any big reveal or big thing.
Well, that's certainly a strategy that the people for Comiket, that's a strategy a lot of people employ there, because honestly, it's not something I'm that into that I would. The one thing about Comiket is, it is, like I said, 500,000 people in 3 days. So if you want to be there when it opens in the morning, people will line up for a couple of hours at least to get in. If you don't mind showing up an hour after the doors open, you can generally walk in without even having to wait. So that's always what I did. But for a lot of people, there are doujin releases that are either exclusive to Comiket or premiere at Comiket. So you'll get people and the more famous doujin circles who really, even though they're fan comics theoretically, they're really almost institutionalized. They're commercial. You'll get people who show up hours early to line up, and then they split up into teams with everybody. They have their map, and they've got all their X's on the map, and there's hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of doujin circles there every day, and they'll race to their tables, and they'll have a list of circles that they have to hit. And you go here and buy 3 copies of this, I go here and buy 3 copies of this, and then they all meet at the end and split up the swag. So that's like you said in the beginning. No, that is more of a buying and selling kind of convention. There is an artist alley at Anime Expo, which is pretty impressive actually. And there's also the commercial booths, which you'll see in some video, which accompanies this chat. I took some video in there. Those guys like Aniplex and PA Works, they're going to be selling stuff at their booths. And a lot of that is convention exclusives. That's something that has carried over from the Japanese anime convention scene, which is there's really an expectation that if a big company is going to go to a con and set up a booth, they have to have merchandise that's exclusive to that event. It's just,
I agree.
It is. If they don't do it, you're basically going to get pilloried by the fan base. So,
right.
Yeah, and I'm actually surprised not to see companies like Visual Arts, Key, and Nitro Plus that are really big in the visual novel community. I'm surprised they don't show up at Anime Expo, because visual novels, as I'm sure you know, Setsuken, are quite popular in the West now. Yeah. And those guys are, generally speaking, when you go to Comiket, the most packed booths are the ones attached to the big visual novel companies like Nitro Plus and Visual Arts. There'll be people will line up for hundreds and hundreds of people will line up to get to those booths to buy whatever they're selling. So I think those guys would get a very, very favorable reception at Anime Expo, and I'm kind of surprised not to have seen them there.
Oh, that's that's pretty remarkable, I think. So you brought up a few interesting points. I think the idea of exclusive merch or collectible things at a convention is something that you just expect at a convention or an event, whether it's San Diego Comic-Con, whether it's a conference. I know I've been to the Game Developers Conference, and there are specifically things you can only get there. PAX definitely has its unique convention-only items. So I think that's a general expectation, I think, at this point, from conventions in general. If you're going to a convention, there has to be that convention-exclusive thing that you get kind of as a souvenir of that time.
Well, it makes sense, yeah.
The other thing that you brought up regarding Comiket, I think, again, I just want to point out, Genshiken does do an episode or two. The original, the first season, I haven't seen the second one. But Genshiken does do that whole... I think it was Genshiken, if I'm not mistaken, where they do the whole run through Comiket to get all the doujin that they want.
Yeah. That is Genshiken, and which is, in some sense, the ultimate anime about otaku, I think it's probably fair to say. But also stuff like Oremo also does a whole Comiket.
Oh, yeah, that's what it was. It was My Little Sister Can't Be This Cute, which, that show. And
you'll see Comiket pop up under an assumed name or under its real name. I've seen it probably in 6 or 7 anime now, at least over the years. It's just such a huge part of that community in Japan. I mean, It's where the rubber meets the road, you know. It's where doujins and manga and anime and visual novels. It's where it all comes together. It really is the biggest otaku event in the world, bar none. And I think everyone who's really a fan, I'm not that side of the anime that I love. I mean, you're not going to see cross-game stuff at Comiket. You're not going to see Seirei no Moribito stuff at Comiket. I'm not necessarily going there. I mean, there are circles that have Hunter doujinshi, but that's not necessarily where I'm headed either. But the point is that I think the spectacle of it, even if you're not someone who collects doujins, even if you're not interested in that sort of anime that tends to prompt a lot of that material, you should still do it if you can, because there's not many times, if you're really passionate and serious about something, where you can say, I went to the epicenter of that thing in the world. And Comiket is the epicenter of the otaku community. If you're into anime, visual novels, manga, doujins, that's the biggest gathering anywhere ever. It happens twice a year. The summer one is bigger one than the winter one, but a lot smellier. And I strongly recommend. I went, the whole time I lived in Tokyo before I moved down to Kyoto, I went twice a year. I didn't miss one. And there were times I would tell myself, you know what? it's so exhausting. It's so many people. I'm not going to buy any doujins probably. It's just, do I really want to drag myself? I think I'm going to pass. I'm going to sit this one out, and I never sat that one out. I always went because, that's Mecca. That's it. That's, if you're into that sort of thing, that's the center of the universe, Comiket.
Cool. So I have a very interesting question for you, because the way I kind of read it, it almost seems like, going back to Anime Expo, it almost seems like some of the bigger newsworthy announcements actually happen here at Anime Expo, rather than... I know Comiket has a presence there, and there are anime-specific events in Japan,
right? But
in terms of like a centralized event where you're getting like news announcements, series announcements, sequel announcements, I almost feel like Anime Expo is more powerful or more impactful than, at least in my mind, Comiket, and that some of that just might be my ignorance. But
I think you might be right.
True?
I think you might be right, because if anything, because the focus of Comiket is on doujins more than on the commercial side, although doujins are commercial in their own way, but not on the corporate side, let's say. I think if anything in Japan, you're more likely to see those things at like Anime Japan, which is the big corporate event, which used to be Tokyo Anime Fair. Then they had the whole Bill 156 thing where they were trying to restrict content, and so they had a rival convention in Chiba, and they eventually merged. It became Anime Japan, and that's now the big commercial anime event, the corporate. And then there's also Jump Festa. So anything major, which I also attended every year when I was in Tokyo, that will get your big, anything Shonen Jump related will get announced there. But I see a lot of announcements at Anime Expo, and for whatever reason, it seems to me, I mean, this could be my perception, but it could be completely wrong, but I seem to see even more announcements at Anime Boston, and it may just be the timing of Anime Boston or something, but both of them get a lot of announcements. Obviously, streaming, not streaming necessarily, but I'm sorry, but like licensing announcements, you'll almost always see those at either Anime Boston, Otakon, Anime Expo. And yeah, stuff like, I was actually expecting the announcement of the second season of Boku no Hero to come at Anime Expo, because I knew there was going to be a second season, and I knew it would get announced sooner or later. And the timing was perfect, and I knew that the director, Nagasaki Kenji, was going to be there. They actually ended up announcing it like 4 days earlier in the magazine, which shows you who really holds the power, because I'm sure if it had been up to Bones, they probably would have said, let's announce this at Anime Expo. But, Shonen Jump, we talked about this in the Ask Enzo segment, the production committee, the most powerful voice in the production committee is whoever puts in the most money up front, and they stand to make the most. And when it's a Shonen Jump action series, that is Shueisha. That's the publisher that makes the most money. So if they say, we want to announce it in the magazine, they're going to announce it in the magazine. But yes, there are always announcements. There were a couple of major premieres. The Shinkai Makoto film Your Name premiered there. We got 2 episodes of Mob Psycho 100, which I won't give you any spoilers. I won't give you any spoilers, but we watched 2 episodes of Mob Psycho 100 with the founder and president of Bones sitting in the room.
Oh my god! I am so envious.
And the second episode was unbelievably great. The first episode was good too, but the second episode was great. Rewrite we saw. So there were a lot of stuff because Crunchyroll and Funimation are both there, and they're both made as you would expect them to be major presences at an American anime convention, and they had their own premieres. They were doing a lot of stuff. They previewed several series each that are going to be streaming on their respective channels. And then there was a lot of stuff. We actually saw a little bit of footage from the second Aono Exorcist series that's coming up.
Oh man, you actually saw footage?
Just like 15 seconds, not a lot.
Wow, still.
Yeah.
That was the big announcement. I remember when you tweeted that on your Twitter account, which follow him at Guardian Enzo, I believe, right?
Yeah, at Guardian Enzo.
Mm-hmm.
I think.
So you tweeted that, and I immediately quoted you on our Anime Evo news article that announced, because the Aono Exorcist thing had leaked a day or two earlier, I think.
Yeah, and so that was. It is at Guardian Enzo. Yes, you're right. That was a fun one to tweet out. Also, I want to tell if I have time for a couple of personal anecdotes, I'd love to tell them because I had a couple of really good stories that come out of it. But when the Pillows announcement came down at the Production IG Furikuri panel, I may very well be the first person to have tweeted that out, which is pretty cool. If I wasn't, I was in the top 3.
Right.
But one of the frustrating things, as I said, is how everything happens on Saturday and Sunday, and that panel ended at the same time the Mob Psycho 100 Bones event was supposed to start. The problem being that was at a screening room at the Marriott Hotel, the JW Marriott, which is actually 3 blocks away. From the convention center. So I had to book it over there and pray that whoever was on the door was not going to be a DB and refuse to let me in. Because everything starts late at Anime Expo. That's a given. But if you're not there when they let the press and premiere people in, they can choose to say, well, they can choose anyway, and that happened to me too, but they can say, sorry, you're screwed. And I knew that one would fill up, and it did. But I got...
so that's an interesting thing. Sorry, yeah. I cut you off there, but... There was a inherent benefit to being press. You didn't have to wait in line.
In theory.
Yeah. Sometimes I'm sure you had to, but I think you were able to kind of get into... So there wasn't as much of a tension of, I have to get to a panel early to line up, and then, Because sometimes when you're just an attendee, and I've always gone to conventions as an attendee, or... the one time I was a volunteer.
Right.
But then you have to come early to a panel, which means you end up maybe skipping a panel just so you can get to the next one.
Well, and of course, Setsuken, that's the reason why they let press people in early, so they don't have to do that, because if you're going to give someone a press badge, you want them to write about as much shit from your event as possible. So there's a good reason, just so I don't feel like this is I deserve these special privileges or anything, but the fact of the matter is, they want me there, they want all the people who are there covering for press because they want us to give them free publicity. And as the payback for that is, we'll say we're going to give you a badge, and this is on their website. It's a very clear policy that says you get let in with the premier people, the premier of the premier fan holders, which is basically a line of people, and we let them in at you line up, and then they let you in first, and then they let in all the non-premier people and non-press people, which on paper I think is a great system if the people at the door actually knew that's how it was supposed to work. But there was a lot of stuff where you would see the regular audience would get let in before the premier audience, and obviously if you paid a couple $100, it wasn't so much for me, but for the people who paid good American dollars for those premier badges, they were pissed. And there was
I'm sure they were,
trying to get convention managers and stuff, trying to get people to come. There were a couple times it got pretty rough and tumble. But in theory, yes, the idea is you don't have to skip stuff because you can show up and you're going to get in and you can write about it. But the problem again with the Bones thing was that was a good, like I say, 3 blocks away,
Right.
And literally, the one panel ended at 6:15, the other was supposed to start at 6:15. So I booked over there as fast as I could. I haven't run that much since I was on the indoor soccer team a few years ago. So I get there. It hasn't started, but they've already let all the premiere people in. And so I basically got lucky and had a person. First they said, well, stand here, we'll see what happens. And then somebody else said, oh, you're press? I want to just go. So I went in there, and the place is packing out. It's very few seats left, and there was this big roped-off section near the front. And so I said, do you have somewhere you want press to sit? Because, and they said, oh,
right.
Just go behind that yellow police tape and sit over there. So I did, and that was where the studio people were sitting. So,
that's fantastic.
So I tweeted out. I thought this was funny. I said, just hoofed it in to the Mob Psycho, and I got seated with the studio people up front. It's pretty bizarre. Plus, Zumbra from RC Random Curiosity was there too, and I kind of wanted to let him know where I was. And then on the way out, I'm walking back out. This is only the second time this has ever happened to me at a concert. Was kind of excited. I was walking out after the panel, and somebody says, "Excuse me, are you Guardian Enzo?" And I said, yes. And he said, well, I just wanted to say, I'm a big fan of yours. And he said, which really kind of touched my heart. He said, I thought the stuff you did with Hunter x Hunter was unbelievable. And oh my God.
Which it was.
Straight to, thank you. I love that show so much. Straight to my heart, that cut like an arrow. And I was like, that's incredibly nice. But can I just ask, how the hell did you know who I was?
Yes, that was going to be my big question.
Because he said, well, I follow you on Twitter, and I saw your thing saying that you'd rushed in at the last minute and got seated over with the studio people, and I saw you up there because there was hardly anybody in those seats. So I figured, I wonder if that's Guardian Enzo sitting over there, that one bearded, European guy with all those Japanese people from Bones. And I was like, well, yeah, that's me. So that was really fun because that was, you don't. And when you're a blogger, you don't get a lot of fan encounters, and it's always nice whenever you hear people will give you a comment sometime or send you an email, which is always great and sincerely appreciated. But to actually have someone take you aside in person and thank you and say, I really like what you're doing, that's pretty damn cool, man. I don't mind telling you. Then the other fun thing for me was probably my biggest thrill was, I got to do an interview with Tsurumaki Kazuya and Shintani Mayumi from Furikuri, which is...
And that was the highlight of the convention, you would say, right?
I would, for me, because, Furikuri was, no exaggeration, one of the seminal series that made me an anime fan. It literally was one of the shows that made me say, oh my God, this medium is incredible. And I was a huge Gainax fan generally. I'm a big Gainax fanboy, and it makes me very sad to see what's happened to them now. But that's
before you get into that, I will say this is one of those examples of places where we differ.
Yeah.
I actually wasn't a huge fan of Fully Cooley. I think it was fine. Definitely visually very interesting. Tackled some interesting themes, but I don't hold it in the same revere as you do, and I think there are some people who kind of have that situation.
Yes, you're absolutely right. Like Samu from RC, who generally agrees with me more than probably any of the other writers over there.
Right.
He's not a Gainax fan. He's not a Furikuri fan. Totally okay. I get it. But
that's besides the point, in a way, right?
I do think it also is a show. Well, I don't know. I don't want to get too deep into it. Anyway, for me, that show is literally, like I said, it's probably number 2 on my all-time list. Behind Seirei no Moribito. Absolutely love it. So you had the guy who directed it, who really was the showrunner on that show, who was Ano-san's right-hand man on Evangelion, and then you had the voice actress for Haruko, who is not a recluse by any means, but if you know anything about her history, she's not primarily a voice actress, so she's made very few appearances and talked very little about her time on Furikuri, because she's basically a theatrical actress. She's in plays. So I was not even expecting her to be there. I was initially supposed to do... They set up to do one-on-one interviews. Then it was decided it was going to be a panel of interview. I was like, all right, well, mild disappointment, but that's fine. I still get to be in a room with them. I get to sit 3 feet away from those two people. and there were only like 6 or 7 of us in there asking questions, so it was fine. So I happened on that day to be wearing my Hanshin Tigers jersey, which my friend Mark in Japan gave me. And, Hanshin Tigers, if you'd follow Japanese baseball at all, is almost like the Chicago Cubs, which is my ultimate favorite team. Chicago Cubs of Japanese baseball. A lot of failure and close misses over the years, but not a lot of ultimate success. So I sort of naturally bonded with them. They play in an old historic stadium that's a lot like Wrigley Field or Fenway Park. Anyway, so I'm wearing this jersey, and I asked my first question, and Shintani-san says, she speaks pretty decent English, by the way. She says, "Excuse me, are you a Hanshin fan?" And I said, "Well, yes. Thank you for asking." And they both had a good laugh at that. And I asked my questions, and then we went through our whole round, about 45 minutes of questions. I got about 4 or 5 questions in.
And there's an interview posted on Lost America.
There is, and we may do something with that here, too, at some point, too.
Right.
But at the end of it, we took some pictures of them, which they do at the end of all the interview sessions, which they like, you can't take video of it, and you can't use your sound, but you can take still pictures and use those. And I'm getting ready to leave, and I pick up my bag on the way out, and the translator runs up behind me, and she says, "Sumimasen," and I turn around, I'm like, oh my god, what have I done wrong? And she says, "Well, Shintani-san thinks it's very cool that you're wearing the Tigers jersey and would like to take some pictures with you."
Oh, wow.
And I was like, okay, I just completely plotzed right there. I mean, that was like, what am I was like, yeah. And I just basically handed her my camera and said, "If you can, take a couple for me as well, please, please, please," which she did. So she, Mayumi-san, Shintani-san came up, and, she, kind of put her arm on my shoulder, and we took some pictures, and she said, "Do you like Hanshin Tigers?" And I said, "Yes, I lived in Kansai for a while." I said, "Are you a fan?" And she said, "No, I like Hiroshima Carp." So
oh, wow. Straight cut there, huh?
Yeah, it's fine. So at the end of it, we exchanged business cards, and so I was like, oh my god, I just exchanged business cards with Haruko. I mean, that was like, oh my god. So that was to have that experience, to be a few feet away from those people and ask them the questions, and Tsunomaki Sensei gave me, I had questions I've been wanting to ask him for years, and his answers were really interesting and really informative, and then to have that kind of experience at the end, I mean, that would really never happen at a Japanese convention. Honestly, I think there is more of that up close and personal at American conventions, and so I mean, if that was all that had happened to me over the weekend, that would have made the weekend for me. But as it was like gravy. But I mean, that was really an amazing experience to have.
I agree.
And that's the great thing about anime being kind of the niche thing that it is in this country, is it's not so big that you can't have an experience like that.
I think so as well. When I went to Anime Detour, and like I said, I met Nabishin, the guy who did the one series that I'm a big fan of, the Wallflower, and it was cool because there's a definite effort on the part of all the guests there, all the Japanese directors, and Nabishin's kind of known for his showmanship, but there is a more fan-pleasing and a more fan-serving attitude. It's like they appreciate the fans a lot more, at least from what I got here, because it is in a way, I guess it's surprising and it's perplexing for them.
Yes, I was going to say exactly that. I think, and I see this a lot in Japan with Japanese people, this genuine surprise that foreigners are so interested. And I think that when I see these the anime industry people come to American conventions, they are genuinely surprised, A, at how much we know about anime,
right,
and B, how much we love it. And I think Shinkai, I don't know, I know he lived in Europe for a while, but I think he lived in London before he ever became a big director. And so I can tell you, he was like legitimately like gobsmacked by how wildly enthusiastic that audience was. And it was the same with, it was the same at the Mob Psycho 100 panel, because we had the founder of Bones was there, and he was doing that's Masahiko Minami, and he was like, Mob Psycho, if you follow it at all, viewers, it has a very loyal fan base, and it has a lot of I don't use the word fujoshi too often, because in Japan it's kind of considered, some people like the word and some people don't like it, and so I use it too much.
It's like otaku in
a
way.
But it has a lot of, if it may be even slightly more pejorative than otaku, I think, but it has a lot of the same people who like Haikyuu and Kurabas and those kinds of shows. And so they were like screaming, and so, but that's the great thing about the mangaka, is his stuff is very crossover. He hits many different demographic groups, and you could tell that Minami-san was like, why do you people know so much about this series? Why are you so into it? And and I get that a lot. I totally get that. They're genuinely thrilled and shocked that we're so into this. And I think it's exactly what you said. They want to pay that back. And they want I think they expect their fans in Japan, but I think in a funny sort of way in Japan, being an otaku is like almost like a business-like thing. It's like, hey, I'm serious about this. And in America, the fans are really more just like fans, right? And I think that there's less pressure on the Japanese creators because the attitude is a little bit different. And so I think for them it's almost relaxing as it can ever be for a Japanese person to be in a foreign environment, which is never totally.
I think so.
Yeah, yeah.
I think it's almost like a victory lap. To me, and I obviously haven't been to Anime Expo, but I've seen some Japanese people at the Game Developers Conference when I attended that, and even there is just a sense of like pride, because I think Japan, despite the fact that it's kind of a really big deal, it is a small country, and anime and games and manga are kind of the big things that I think make that country so famous, and also make their culture so famous. So it's like it's a big pride thing, I think, for them as well.
It is, but I think there's as in many things with the Japanese, I think there's a bit of a conflict with them in their psyche about this, because I think there's a certain, you have like the Japanese government now has the Cool Japan thing that they do, where they're trying to use, and the political parties are starting to use manga to try to promote themselves and stuff. But I also think that there's a part of like the traditional Japanese mindset, especially among older people, who are kind of annoyed that for much of the world this is what they know their country for. I really, I saw that firsthand.
Interesting.
And I know that, and I think that it's very important that for us in the West we separate. We have a tendency, because the people who love the one in here always love the other, pretty much, anime and manga. That's the same group of fans. In Japan, from a cultural standpoint, even though at least half of all anime are adapted from manga, probably, it's a very, very different level of acceptance between those two things. And I think for anime still, even in Japan, there's still a sizable group of the population that resents anime and its popularity. Whereas manga is so long-standing and such a native art form that every demographic, I see grannies and grandpas reading manga at the park, on the train. It's nothing to them. Salarymen in nice suits open up their briefcase, they take out a beer and a Shonen Jump. That's so the manga is different. But anime, there really still is, I think, a certain level, and this is one of the things I love about Japan, that I think the more you get to know the country, the more you realize it. The whole culture, the whole country, it's all about contrast. It's this country has this incredible history, these temples and shrines, and Kyoto with all its beautiful buildings, and the Shinto religion is such an everyday part of the Japanese life, and they still do certain things exactly the same way they've been done for 1,000 years, but it also has this incredible modernity, and so many, especially in Tokyo, so many great innovations have been invented there, And so it's everything in Japan is about this juxtaposition of the one against the other. And I think with anime, it's the same thing. It is a big part of what makes them famous worldwide. And I think even at some point, the same people who realize that and try to take advantage of it also kind of resent it. So I think it's a very interesting. That's one of the things, like I said, that I really love about Japan is that sense of contrast that runs through everything there. But anyway, so that's my Anime Expo story. Get your ass over there next year. We expect to see you. And actually, I think. Well, let me ask you. Anything else you want me to discuss before we wrap it up?
Sure. So there was one more thing, and I think maybe this is a bit late in the game, but notable announcements, not maybe premieres, because you definitely talked a lot about that stuff, but. Well, there's one thing. You did watch Kimi no Wa, I believe?
Yes.
So, tell me a bit about that, just because we covered it in the preview and you were excited about it. How was that?
That's a tough one for me because it was a world premiere, because it hasn't even opened in Japan yet. I kind of made a decision. Like, for example, I have watched movies in theaters in Japan and blogged them without any screen caps or whatever, just because, I thought that people would be interested in hearing what I had to say about it. I decided not to blog that because I didn't think that would be fair to Shinkai. So I won't go into any details. What I will say is...
and if there's any NDAs, don't
there's nothing like that. I mean, I'm not going to share any imagery, obviously. I'm not going to share any plot details. What I will say is, I'm a huge Shinkai fan. I think as a visual artist, he's unmatched in anime, maybe in animation. And I've liked some of his storytelling. I absolutely love, some not so much. But I think there's an innocence to it that I really enjoy. This film, it's definitely the most. It deals with some heavy themes, which he always does, but it definitely has more light moments, more lighthearted, intentionally lighthearted moments than any Shinkai film so far. And I think he even said, and has said publicly, that he did sort of intentionally set out to do something a little lighter, a little brighter this time, and I think he did accomplish that. I think it's, from a storytelling standpoint, it's probably one of his more mainstream films. Not as mainstream as Children Who Chase Voices from Below, which I kind of thought suffered from almost transparently trying to be a Ghibli film. But this is more of a mainstream kind of a story, but I think in a more effective way than Hoshi no Koe. I think it's very successful. The gold standard for me is with Shinkai is 5 centimeters per second.
Yes, same here.
Especially the first part of 5 centimeters per second, which, as I've said in the past on my site, I consider probably the perfect 20 minutes of anime, that first segment. I don't put this film quite at that level, but I would put it right in that next tier. Probably this film and The Place Promised in Our Early Days, which is my other second favorite Shinkai film. I put this right on a level with that, and it's very accomplished. It's very approachable, and I will say too, because of the mismanagement of the line and stuff, I ended up having to sit literally like 200 yards away from the screens, so in the gigantic main hall there. So the visual side of things, I was really, really not able to get a good sense of that, and I'm really going to go into this film on a much more deep level when I actually have a chance to see it. But one of the nice things is that Funimation did in fact license it for theatrical release. That is one of the announcements that came out of Anime Expo. It was licensed for a theatrical release in the United States. So at least some Americans will get a chance to see it in a theater, which is the way all Shinkai films should be seen, if at all possible. You may have to go to the nearest big city to you in order to see it, because I'm not guessing it's going to do a 50-state rollout, like a Miyazaki film would. But it will play,
or even the Dragon Ball Z stuff.
Or Pokemon films and stuff. But it will get a theatrical release, and Funimation, of course, that means there also will be a Western Blu-ray DVD release as well. So you will get a chance to see it, and when I have a chance to see it in either of those formats, then I will certainly cover it in more detail. But I don't think anyone who goes to see it, if you're a Shinkai fan, I don't think you're going to be disappointed.
Sure. Okay, so next thing then. You mentioned Ao no Exorcist. they confirmed the arc that's going to happen.
Yes.
And have you read the manga? Do you know
not as far as where the next series is going to come from, the Kyoto saga. I have not read the Kyoto saga.
Oh man, when I heard about that, I was so excited because once the anime finished, and for the first series, I didn't like the ending because it is an anime original ending, and I feel like it loses a lot of what made the series originally so successful. But in the manga, the story is actually a bit darker and starkly different from the anime series, even in the beginning episodes. So, and there's a tonal shift. One of the things that I'd say was different, without spoiling too much, is that Rin is not as easily accepted in the manga as he is in the anime.
I would agree with that, because I have read those early chapters, and I would agree with you. Yes, that's true.
Yep. And that really it boils to the top in this next arc, and I'm curious to see how they do that, and we can talk about Outer Exorcist at some other point, but that was kind of the big news for me. But you did see some other things. You said some Studio Wit stuff. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, they showed... they didn't show anything from the live-action Ghost in the Shell movie, but they were talking a lot about that. They showed the most memorable thing to me from the Production IG Wit Studio, and if people don't know, Wit Studio is basically a subdivision of Production IG, well known to Americans mostly as the studio behind Attack on Titan, of course.
Yep.
And
Kotetsujo no Kabinari.
But I would also say and Hozuki no Reitetsu, which I think is a great series. But so they did announce that the new Attack on Titan season will be coming spring 2017. And one of the big topics of conversation was, have they waited too long on this? And I know a lot of people were saying yes, they have. But we'll see. I'm not the world's biggest fan, so when it comes out, I'll watch it, and I'm not going to sweat whether it's been a year, 2 years, whatever it's been. But the one piece of video footage that they showed us was a new preview, which is really more than a preview. It was about 3 minutes worth of footage from the Ancient Magus Bride adaptation.
Oh, the OVA.
Yeah. So basically, for people who don't know this, it's a very, very, very popular manga that is also won numerous major awards and been nominated for pretty much every major manga award in Japan. They've chosen, interestingly, to do a 2-part OVA series, which is a prequel, rather than actually do an adaptation of the series itself, which I think we can probably assume will come after, but not until at least late 2017, because that's when the OVA series is going to end. But the video footage that they showed was stunning. I mean, it was like jaw-droppingly good, and we expect good production values from IG Wit. I mean, they're one of the top. They're a platinum studio. You expect them to deliver the goods. But if you know the artwork of the manga, it is a beautifully drawn manga. Strange story. I mean, interesting and compelling, but definitely odd. But the artwork is beautiful, and if the whole OVA looks as good as the parts that they pieced together for what they showed us, no one will be anything less than wowed by this. I mean, this is how I felt when I watched back in 2007. Sere no Moribito, which Production IG did, which I considered to be, to this day, probably the greatest TV anime of all time, but certainly visually speaking, in terms of the art, in terms of the animation, at the time it was released, it was, I think, without question, the most beautiful TV anime ever made. And in fact, if you get a chance to watch that show now, even almost 10 years after it came out, you'd be amazed at how well it holds up. It looks better, considerably better than most anime that are produced in 2016. And that's how I felt in 2007. I felt I've never seen anything like this in a TV anime. When I was looking at that footage from Ancient Magus Bride, I was like, this is hardcore. So I was sort of looking forward to that. I do think the manga is very interesting. It's very mature and challenging. But now that I've seen that footage, I'm like, okay, I'm putting X's on the calendar until this thing comes out, because it's...
Yeah, and I think it's coming out in August, correct?
I believe so.
Yep. Okay.
Yep.
Was there any announcement of a Kabinari of the Iron Fortress Season 2?
2 movies.
Two movies.
Which are, as far as I know, like they're calling them compilation movies.
So a recap.
Yeah, but I think there's going to be like some new footage. I would expect, based on the sales for that thing, that it's going to get a second season. But they may do something like they did when they released Gargantia, which also sold very well on... it was another original series. It sold very well on Blu-ray. Did not end up getting a second season per se.
Oh,
but
yeah.
It ended up getting several OVAs, original OVAs eventually. And I think you'll get some kind of original material with Cabaneri, whether it's OVAs or another season. I think there's too much money to be made here to not do it. And also, the thing I would say with Cabaneri is the story is kind of like, well, okay, you aren't going to tell us how this happened? You know?
Right.
That's like, I'm assuming that's season 2, you know?
Yep, and we both kind of wrote about this, and we were both kind of disappointed by what happened at the end, I would say, of the first series.
Yeah, although, again, my feeling is really, okay, that was just kind of very routine, but the real interesting thing is what the hell happened to bring the Earth to this state. There's your second season right there. You know, dish it up, and I'll check it out, because I'm curious to see what happens, you know?
Mm-hmm. And I think that world was kind of the draw of the show, and it was unfortunate that they decided to focus on a political family drama for like the last piece of it.
Yeah, you know, it is what it is. I mean, you know, it is what it is. It still ended up being one of the biggest commercial successes of what was actually a fairly disappointing season commercially. So I'm sure they're crying into their sake, wiping their eyes with 1,000 yen bills, but. That's fine. We'll get more. We're getting the movies for sure, and I would be surprised if we don't get some original content above and beyond that.
Was there anything else that you would say is notable?
As far as announcements, those are the ones that really stood out for me. Was you know, the other thing is, like, with regards to the live-action Ghost in the Shell, which I didn't realize, is that Beat Takeshi Kitano, the very, very famous, infamous, one might say, Japanese director and actor, is playing a major role in that, which I had not heard of, and I think most of the people in the crowd had not heard. There was some discussion of the whole Scarlett Johansson.
There was.
Whitewashing. Okay. I mean, somebody asked. The producer was there. Somebody asked it. He really kind of dodged it a little bit, but I mean, his answer was basically, you know, well, listen, you know, when Scarlett Johansson approaches you and says, "I want to star in your movie," it's hard to say no, because you know, we're making a movie out of an anime that 99% of the American public has never heard of,
right?
And also, she's a really good actress. So you know, that may not be the answer that people want to hear, but I guess we live in the real world, you know. And if Scarlett Johansson says, "I want to make your little anime film," I think it would be hard for any producer to say no to that.
Right.
So that you know. So other than that, I'm trying to think if there were any other major announcements. There was no One Punch Man. I keep wanting to say One Piece Man. One Punch Man second season was not announced, which kind of surprised me. I was expecting it would be, because One Punch Man was a huge, huge factor at this convention. They had a lot of people from the show there. They had
I think it will be at some point. I think assume, everybody expects it.
I would assume. I just thought this would be a logical place for them to announce it.
Right.
As far as like other major announcements, I would say, you know, those were the biggies. Okay,
cool. So to kind of wrap it up, would you? I think this is a question that kind of answers itself. But would you go to Anime Expo again?
Oh yes, absolutely.
And would you recommend that other people go as well? What would you say to someone who's looking to get into Anime Expo? How do you get? I guess for you it was a press pass, but do the tickets sell out fairly quickly? Because I know for PAX and some of the other stuff, they're out in hours.
Yeah, no, not as quickly. As I said, Saturday was the only day they actually stopped selling badges because they literally had no more room. But it's easier and much more convenient and cheaper to pre-register, buy your badges online, pre-register. Unfortunately, you still have to wait in line to register when you get there, but there's no way around that.
Yeah, that's just part
I would say if you are in a position to do it, they do sell what they call the Premier Fan Badge, which, if you can afford it, I would heartily recommend, because it's going to cut you through a lot of those registration lines. It's going to cut you through, in theory, it's going to get you into the panels and major events early, and it gets you a chance to buy tickets to any of the because they have several ticketed events as well, and it gives you a chance to buy tickets for those before anybody else. And also, there's a nice little lounge area for the Premiere fans where they have, because with that many people and not many places to sit and, spotty air conditioning, having a nice place where you can go and chill is a nice thing. The Premiere fans do have their own lounge area where they can get free soft drinks and free coffee.
Oh, that is interesting.
Yeah.
That is interesting.
It's not dirt cheap, but if you're serious about it, if you plan to go for at least 3 of the 4 days and you really want to get the most out of the experience, I think for the average person, the Premiere fan badge is a good investment. But as far as what I say you should go, I mean, if you live in Bangor, Maine or something, I mean, it's a long way to travel. But if you're on the West Coast or the Mountain West and you can get a relatively cheap ticket to LA, which is a nicer city than a lot of people look down on it would admit, there's a lot of fun stuff to do there. LA can be a fun place to visit for a few days, and if this is the biggest anime convention in America, and so if you're into anime, I don't think you'll ever see a greater lineup of content in terms of premieres and guests over the course of 3 days anywhere in North America than you'll see at Anime Expo. So yes, you should go. If you can go, you should go.
Yes. So I think that definitely convinces me. I'm definitely planning on going next year, and whether as press or as a Premiere member, we'll see. We'll see kind of how it goes. We definitely, and this thing will hopefully be going. Notaku will hopefully be going around, and maybe we can get some video content and some other stuff scheduled for that as well.
Yep.
But. Yep, thank you once again for you took the lion's share of this anime chat, just because I really did want you to talk about the experience of Anime Expo, because unlike, say, the video games industry or even the movies industry or even comics, anime doesn't have the same recognition in terms of a convention, even though Anime Expo is as big as it is. And I think for me in the future, it'd be cool if they live stream some of the stuff, if they did like Twitch streams for some of the announcement panels. I know PAX ends up doing video content after the fact, and I think E3 does it as well. They'll stream all the big announcements and all that stuff. So hopefully, I think as it grows and as I think anime gets bigger and bigger in the West, it'll expand. But
I hope so. I think that's a great idea, they could definitely make better use of the technology that's out there than they are right now. But that's one of those things that I think comes with adapting to how big they've become, and I think they'll get there in time.
Okay. So I think that's it for this week.
Just one more thing, actually, I wanted to cover, because I know that America wants to know this. Are you on Pokemon Go yet?
Me? Oh, no. I dropped off the Pokemon thing a while ago. I think Pokemon 2000 was the last time I was interested in that franchise.
See, now I think you're dating yourself here, because I had people in my office at work, catching Charizards in the office. This thing is viral. I'm telling you, they're taking the servers down. They can't handle the load. This thing is I'm telling you, this is big. So I have to say, I find the whole thing a bit bewildering myself. I watched my share of Pokemon back in the day, but I was more of a Digimon guy. But
yes, I was too, actually.
But okay. So a disappointment there. I know that America definitely felt that Setsuken was probably a big Pokemon Go guy. So I think you've let a lot of people down tonight.
Just to redeem myself a little bit, I am playing the Zero Time Dilemma visual novel, the third part of the Zero Escape series. So maybe we'll kind of talk about visual novels at some point, because you did bring it up and allude to it.
Okay.
But I am playing Japanese games, and I do play games every now and then. Pokemon is just one of those things where I think it's skewed to a younger audience now.
Not according to the folks in my office who are chasing Pokemon with that Pokemon Go thing. But I guess that's another Anime Chat.
Yep, more power to them. Yep.
All right, sounds good.
All right. So, thanks once again for listening. Let us know what.
And watching.
And watching. Let us know what you think about this in the comments. We're obviously trying new things, and Notaku is still very experimental and we're kind of new to the whole thing, but we're learning as we go. We think the audio quality is a bit better. Just know that we are kind of working on that as well, and I think it will continue to improve as we kind of improve our techniques, and hopefully next week that will go and improve a little bit. So if you like this, please like the video, subscribe to the channel, and